On the frigid night of January 15th in downtown Chicago, Dominic Ricci, the most feared crime boss in the Midwest, left a trail of blood across the pristine snow as he stumbled between warehouse shadows. 3 bullets lodged in his body. The sound of approaching sirens mixed with the footsteps of rival family hitmen echoed through the industrial district as 20-year-old Ellie Marsh, a community college student working the night shift at a nearby diner, made the split-second decision that would alter both their lives forever. The girl, who could barely afford her next meal, threw open her rusted car door to a man whose name struck terror across the city, his once immaculate suit now crimson-soaked as he collapsed into her passenger seat. This is the story of how a desperate act of compassion from society's margins would challenge everything a hardened criminal thought he understood about loyalty and redemption. Subscribe now to discover how the poorest girl in the city saved the richest criminal in America, and the price they both paid for her mercy. Ellie Marsh had $18.37 to last until Friday. She counted the worn bills twice, shoulders hunched beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of Lou's Diner, where the night shift paid just enough to keep her apartment's heat on through the brutal Chicago winter. The ancient Chevy Cavalier she'd inherited from her grandmother needed new brake pads. Her tuition payment was 2 weeks overdue, and the cupboards in her studio apartment held nothing but ramen noodles and a half-empty jar of peanut butter. "You heading out, Ellie?" Lou called from behind the counter, his weathered face creased with concern. "It's coming down hard out there." Ellie nodded, tucking the meager tips into her pocket and pulling on a coat that had seen better days. "Can't be late on rent again," she said with a tired smile. "Mrs. Kowalski already threatened to evict me last month." Lou frowned, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "Take some leftovers at least. The kitchen's just going to toss 'em." She accepted the container of meatloaf and mashed potatoes with genuine gratitude. One more meal she wouldn't have to pay for. One more day she could put gas in her car. The snow swirled in angry gusts as Ellie trudged toward her car, parked in the dimly lit lot behind the diner. The South Side Industrial District was deserted this time of night, a ghost town of shuttered warehouses and forgotten dreams. The only sounds were the distant rumble of trains and the occasional police siren, constant reminders of the city's sleepless pulse. The first gunshot cracked through the silence like lightning, splitting the sky. Ellie froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Growing up in this neighborhood taught you certain survival instincts. Keep your head down, mind your business, and when you hear gunfire, you get low and you get gone. 2 more shots followed in quick succession, then the squeal of tires on ice. Ellie crouched behind her car, keys clutched in trembling fingers. Her breath formed desperate clouds in the frigid air as she weighed her options. The smart move was to run back inside the diner, lock the doors, call the police. But Lou had already closed up, lights off, and her car, her escape, was right here. The sound of ragged breathing and stumbling footsteps grew louder. Someone was coming her way, moving with the uneven gait of the wounded. Ellie pressed herself against the driver's side door, praying to remain invisible in the shadows. The man appeared at the corner of the building, one hand pressed to his side, the other gripping a sleek black handgun. Even in the dim light, Ellie recognized the expensive tailoring of his overcoat, now torn and darkened with what could only be blood. His face, angular and aristocratic, was contorted in pain, but his eyes remained eerily alert, scanning the parking lot with predatory intensity. Dominic Ricci. The name whispered through her mind like a cold draft. Everyone in Chicago knew his face from newspaper articles and television reports. The untouchable crime lord who had evaded conviction for 15 years. The man whose organization controlled everything from construction contracts to city council votes. Their eyes met across the snow-covered asphalt. Recognition flickered in his expression, not of her specifically, but of what she represented. A civilian, a witness, a liability. More voices shouted in the distance. Heavy footfalls crunched through snow, drawing closer. Blue and red lights began to flash against the warehouse walls, police responding to the gunfire. Dominic Ricci was trapped between rival gunmen and approaching law enforcement, bleeding out in a parking lot with nowhere to run. Something shifted in Ellie's mind, a calculation so rapid she barely registered making it. Maybe it was the desperate look in his eyes, suddenly more human than monster. Maybe it was the recklessness born of having so little to lose. She unlocked her car. "Get in," she hissed, sliding into the driver's seat. "Down on the floor." For a moment, the most powerful crime boss in Chicago stared at her in disbelief. Then survival instinct took over. He lunged toward the passenger door, wrenched it open, and folded his tall frame into the footwell as Ellie had instructed, clenching his teeth against a groan of pain. Ellie started the engine, which protested with a sputtering cough before catching. She pulled out of the lot just as flashlight beams swept across the spot where Dominic had been standing seconds earlier. "Where are you taking me?" he growled, his voice strained but commanding. "Away from here," Ellie answered simply, hands tight on the steering wheel as she navigated the snowy streets with practiced caution. Nothing to attract attention. Nothing to suggest she was harboring a bleeding crime lord on the floor of her 20-year-old Chevy. Why? The question came sharp, suspicious. Ellie glanced down at him. Blood was soaking through his expensive shirt, spreading across the cloth-covered floor of her car. His face was pale, but his dark eyes remained unnervingly focused. "I don't know," she answered honestly. In the distance, more sirens wailed. Ellie took a right turn, then another, moving deeper into the maze of industrial streets she had known all her life. Streets where police rarely patrolled, streets where questions weren't asked. "You know who I am?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And still you help me?" His breathing was becoming more labored, each word carefully measured. "That makes you either very brave or very stupid." Ellie didn't respond. She wasn't sure which it was herself. The weight of what she'd done, what she was doing, began to settle on her shoulders. Harboring a criminal, interfering with a police investigation, risking her life, her freedom, her future, all for a man who would kill her without hesitation if she became inconvenient. "I need a doctor," Dominic said after a long silence. "Someone discreet. I'm not taking you to a hospital." Ellie turned onto a residential street lined with sagging apartment buildings. "They report gunshot wounds." "I have people." He shifted, grimacing. "I need a phone." "There's a burner in the glove compartment," Ellie said. "For emergencies." Dominic reached up with blood-slicked fingers, retrieved the cheap flip phone. "Smart girl." "Practical," she corrected, eyes fixed on the road. "This neighborhood teaches you to be prepared." As Dominic dialed, Ellie realized she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Whatever happened next, her life would never be the same. "Angelo," Dominic's voice cut through her thoughts. "I'm compromised. 3 GSWs, significant blood loss." He paused, listening. "Unknown, female civilian asset." Another pause, his eyes flickering to Ellie. "Sending coordinates now?" When he hung up, the car filled with a silence heavy with unspoken questions and immediate danger. "My doctor will meet us at a safe house," Dominic finally said. 20 minutes from here?" Ellie nodded, hands still tight on the wheel. "Can you make it that long?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've survived worse." She believed him. Men like Dominic Ricci didn't reach his position by being easy to kill. Still, the amount of blood seeping into her car's upholstery suggested this might be the time his luck ran out. "Why are you doing this?" he asked again, his voice slightly weaker, but no less commanding. Ellie considered the question as she navigated the empty streets. Why was she helping this man? He represented everything she should despise. Wealth built on suffering, power maintained through fear. He was the embodiment of the system that kept people like her trapped in poverty, working dead-end jobs, living paycheck to meager paycheck. "I don't know," she repeated. "Maybe I just didn't want to watch someone die in a parking lot. Even someone like me?" His tone was curious, almost amused despite his condition. "Even you." She glanced down at him again, though I might regret it. "You will," he confirmed, matter of fact, "one way or another." They fell silent again as Ellie followed his occasional terse directions. The snowfall grew heavier, blanketing the city in a deceptive purity that obscured the blood and grime beneath. 20 minutes later, They pulled up to an unassuming brownstone on a quiet street in a middle-class neighborhood, nowhere near the luxury Ellie would have associated with a man like Dominic Ricci. Before she could put the car in park, the front door opened and two men emerged. One was slight and wore wire-rimmed glasses, the doctor, she presumed. The other was built like a brick wall, his hand concealed inside his jacket, in a way that made it clear he was armed and ready. "Help me up," Dominic ordered, his voice now undeniably weaker. Ellie came around to the passenger side, opened the door, and found herself supporting much of his weight as he struggled to his feet. He towered over her, and despite his injuries, the latent strength in his frame was intimidating. The scent of blood, expensive cologne, and gunpowder clung to him. The larger man rushed forward, taking Dominic's weight from Ellie. "Boss, what happened?" "The Calabrese family." "Inside," Dominic cut him off. "Questions later." As they moved toward the house, Dominic turned back to Ellie, who stood uncertainly by her blood-soaked car. "Bring her," he ordered his man. "She's seen too much." The large man nodded and gestured for Ellie to follow. "You heard the boss, lady." Panic flared in Ellie's chest. She had done what instinct told her to do, helped a wounded man escape danger. But now reality crashed down. She had delivered herself into the hands of a criminal organization, one notorious for ensuring loose ends never remained untied. "I should go," she said, taking a step back toward her car. "I won't say anything, I swear." The large man moved with surprising speed for his size, placing himself between Ellie and her vehicle. "Can't let you do that. Boss's orders." Dominic, now supported by the doctor, paused at the doorway. "You made your choice in that parking lot, girl. Now you live with it." The door closed behind him, leaving Ellie with the unmistakable knowledge that her $18.37, her rent concerns, her tuition worries, her ordinary struggles, had suddenly become the least of her problems. Inside the brownstone, Ellie discovered a space that defied the modest exterior. The furnishings were sparse but expensive, the security system cutting edge. The large man, Angelo, she learned, directed her to a leather sofa, while Dominic was taken to a back room that had apparently been equipped for exactly this kind of emergency. "Don't move," Angelo instructed, his tone making it clear this was not a suggestion. "Don't touch anything." Left alone in the silent living room, Ellie sank onto the edge of the sofa, her waitress uniform still spattered with Dominic's blood. The events of the past hour played on loop in her mind. She could have stayed hidden, could have let him bleed out in that parking lot, could have called the police after he was gone. Instead, she had thrown her lot in with a man who left bodies in his wake. An hour passed before the doctor emerged, wiping blood from his hands with a surgical towel. "He'll live," the doctor announced to Angelo, who had been standing guard near the front door. 2 through-and-through wounds to the left side, 1 bullet lodged near the shoulder. "I've removed it and given him blood and antibiotics. He'll need rest." "And pain management?" Angelo asked. The doctor smiled thinly. "You know the boss. Refused anything that might dull his thinking." Of course he did, Ellie thought. Men like Dominic Ricci didn't survive by allowing themselves moments of vulnerability. The doctor noticed her then, eyebrows rising. "This the civilian who brought him in?" Angelo nodded. "Boss wants her kept here until he decides what to do with her." The clinical way they discussed her fate made Ellie's blood run cold. She was a problem to be solved, a loose thread to be snipped. "Let me see her hands," the doctor said suddenly, moving toward Ellie. She held them up reflexively, confused by the request. "Waitress," the doctor noted, examining her calloused fingers and the chapped skin from constant exposure to water and cleaning chemicals. "Student too, I'd guess, from the ink stains." He glanced at Angelo. "She's no cop, no fed." "Still a liability," Angelo countered. The doctor shrugged. "That's for the boss to decide." He turned back to Ellie. "You have medical training?" Ellie shook her head. "Basic first aid, CPR certification for my job." "It'll have to do. I can't stay, and someone needs to monitor him. Check the dressing every hour, note any increased bleeding. Temperature checks too. Infection is the biggest risk now." Ellie began to protest, but the doctor was already handing her a digital thermometer and showing her how to change the bandages if necessary. "Keep him alive until morning," the doctor instructed. "I'll be back at dawn." Before she could form another objection, the doctor had gathered his supplies and was heading for the door. "Angelo, walk me out and brief the perimeter team," he called over his shoulder. "Our uninvited guest needs proper instructions." Left alone, Ellie stood frozen in the center of the living room, a thermometer clutched in her blood-stained hand. The weight of responsibility for a crime lord's life suddenly thrust upon her. After a moment's hesitation, she moved toward the bedroom where Dominic had been taken. The door was ajar, spilling a thin ribbon of light across the darkened hallway. She pushed it open slowly, bracing herself for what she might find. Dominic lay on a king-sized bed, his broad chest bare, except for the white bandages wrapped around his torso and left shoulder. An IV line ran to his arm, delivering blood and antibiotics. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. In repose, with the constant mask of control lifted, he looked almost ordinary, a man in pain, vulnerable in sleep. Ellie approached cautiously, placing the thermometer on the nightstand. She should check his temperature now, the doctor had said. Monitor for fever. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached toward his forehead. Before she could make contact, his eyes snapped open and his hand shot up to capture her wrist in a grip like iron. "What are you doing?" he demanded, voice rough with pain, but no less commanding. "Temperature check," Ellie replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Doctor's orders." Dominic studied her face for a long moment, his dark eyes boring into hers as if he could extract her thoughts through sheer force of will. Finally, he released her wrist. "Proceed," he said, the single word carrying the weight of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. Ellie checked his temperature, slightly elevated, but not dangerously so, and made a note on the pad the doctor had left. She was acutely aware of Dominic watching her every move, evaluating, calculating. "You have questions," he said finally. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "Several," Ellie admitted, setting the thermometer aside. "But I'm not sure I want the answers." A hint of amusement flickered across his face. "Wise?" He shifted slightly, wincing. "You've given me your name?" "Ellie." "Ellen Marsh," she corrected. "Everyone calls me Ellie." "Ellen Marsh," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. 22? 20, she said, wondering how much he had already deduced about her life from their brief interaction. "Community college, nursing program." "Ironic," he observed. "Here you are, practicing already." "This isn't exactly what I had in mind." "Life rarely gives us what we have in mind." He gestured to the chair beside the bed. "Sit. If you're to be my night nurse, we might as well be civilized." Ellie perched on the edge of the chair, every muscle in her body tense. "What happens in the morning?" To me, I mean." Dominic's expression revealed nothing. "That depends on several factors, including how well I recover tonight." The implicit threat wasn't lost on Ellie. Her continued survival was directly tied to his. If infection set in, if he took a turn for the worse, she would be held responsible. "Who shot you?" she asked, changing the subject. "The Calabrese family has been trying to expand into my territory for months," he answered, surprisingly forthcoming. "Tonight, they made their move. Unfortunately for them, they underestimated my security detail. Unfortunately for me, I was separated from that detail. So they're still looking for you, along with the police, the FBI, and likely several other interested parties." He smiled thinly. "I'm a popular man tonight." Ellie processed this information, the danger of her situation becoming clearer by the second. "And they'll be looking for me too once they find my car." "Your blood-soaked car with a distinctive uniform and employee name tag inside," Dominic confirmed. "Yes, they'll be quite interested in finding Ellie Marsh from Lou's Diner." A wave of nausea washed over her. In the span of hours, she had gone from anonymous waitress to hunted accomplice. "I need to call my landlady," she said suddenly. "She's expecting rent tomorrow, and if I don't show up—" "Your mundane concerns no longer apply," Dominic cut her off. "The moment you let me into your car, your old life ended. The sooner you accept that, the better your chances of surviving this situation." The clinical brutality of his assessment left Ellie speechless. Everything, her apartment, her job, her classes, her few possessions, all of it was now beyond reach. She had become a ghost in her own life, all because of one impulsive decision. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked, her voice small but surprisingly steady. "For tonight? Keep me alive." Dominic's eyes were already growing heavy, the blood loss and trauma taking their toll despite his iron will. "Tomorrow we'll discuss more permanent arrangements." As his eyes closed, Ellie remained in the chair, the weight of her new reality settling over her like a shroud. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Chicago in a blanket of white that hid all manner of sins. Somewhere in the city, police were discovering her abandoned car, connecting dots, adding her name to lists of persons of interest. Ellie Marsh, 20 years old, nursing student and waitress, had vanished, replaced by a woman with no name, no past, and a future entirely dependent on the whims of a man who destroyed lives for a living. Throughout the night, Ellie maintained her vigil, checking Dominic's temperature, changing his bandages when blood seeped through, monitoring the IV that the doctor had left. Each time she approached, his eyes would open, never fully asleep, never fully trusting her, despite his vulnerable state. By dawn, dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her uniform had stiffened with dried blood. The doctor returned as promised, examining his patient with efficient precision. "No fever, minimal additional bleeding. You did well," he told Ellie, though his tone suggested this was merely an observation, not praise. "The boss has remarkable recuperative abilities." "Years of practice," Dominic commented dryly, now sitting up against the headboard. His color improved, though pain still etched lines around his mouth and eyes. Angelo entered the room, his massive frame filling the doorway. "Perimeter's secure, boss, but we've got complications." The girl's car was found. It's all over the morning news. Waitress suspected of aiding fugitive Dominic Ricci, considered armed and dangerous. Ellie's knees threatened to give way. Armed and dangerous. Her, a nursing student who couldn't afford brake pads. "Her photo?" Dominic asked sharply. "Employee ID from the diner, clear shot of her face," Angelo confirmed. "Police are at her apartment now. They've interviewed her landlady, co-workers." "My grandmother," Ellie whispered, a new horror dawning. "They'll question my grandmother. She has a heart condition. The stress could kill her." For the first time, a flicker of something like sympathy crossed Dominic's face. "Your grandmother raised you?" Ellie nodded. "Since I was 7, my parents were unreliable." "Angelo, find out where the grandmother lives. Send Tessa to her. As a concerned neighbor, community support. Make sure she has medical attention if needed. No police involvement." Angelo nodded, already typing on his phone. Ellie stared at Dominic, caught between gratitude and suspicion. "Why would you help her?" "Consider it payment for services rendered," he replied, gesturing to his bandaged torso. "Besides, civilians should be kept out of our affairs when possible." The casual way he differentiated between civilians and whatever category he placed himself in struck Ellie as profoundly telling. "So what happens to me now?" she asked, voicing the question that had haunted her through the sleepless night. "I'm a liability, aren't I? A witness?" Dominic studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "You're several things, Ellen Marsh. A liability, yes. A witness, certainly, but also an unexpected ally at a critical moment." He shifted, wincing slightly. "I don't forget such things." "What does that mean?" "It means you have options, which is more than most in your position would be offered." He gestured to Angelo, who produced a thick envelope and handed it to Dominic. "Option 1, $20,000, a new identity, and passage to the West Coast. You start over, never return to Chicago, never contact your grandmother or anyone else from your former life. You become someone else entirely." Ellie's breath caught. $20,000 was more money than she had ever possessed at one time, enough to start fresh, to pay for school somewhere else, to rebuild. "And option 2?" she asked, already suspecting she wouldn't like it. "You work for me," Dominic said simply. "Your nursing studies continue, funded by my organization. You live in secure housing. Your grandmother receives the best medical care available, and you become a valuable asset rather than a dangerous loose end. Work for you, doing what? Ellie's voice hardened. I won't hurt people. I won't sell drugs. I won't. You would be exactly what you were last night, Dominic interrupted. A caretaker. My organization requires medical personnel who can be trusted with sensitive situations. Gunshot wounds that can't be reported. Injuries that need treatment without questions. Your training would be accelerated, your education comprehensive. Ellie fell silent, considering the offer. Both options meant the death of Ellen Marsh as she had known herself. Both meant abandoning the small, struggling life she had built. But one meant never seeing her grandmother again, while the other meant binding herself to a criminal empire. How long do I have to decide? Until I finish this conversation, Dominic replied without hesitation. The longer you remain in limbo, the greater the danger to all involved. Ellie looked at the envelope in his hands. Freedom of a sort, but at the cost of everything and everyone she had ever known. Then she looked at Dominic himself, a man who had built an empire on violence and fear, offering her a place within it. If I work for you, she said slowly, I want conditions. My grandmother doesn't just receive care, she's protected. Permanently. I continue my education as planned, with no interference. And I never, ever participate in anything that causes harm. I heal. That's all. Angelo made a derisive sound, but Dominic silenced him with a look. Conditions? He repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. The waitress wishes to negotiate. Ellie lifted her chin. Yes. To her surprise, respect flickered in Dominic's eyes. Very well. Your grandmother will be under my personal protection for the remainder of her life. Your education continues uninterrupted, and your role will be healing only, though you should understand that in my world the line between healing and harm is not always clear. I understand the difference, Ellie insisted, and I'll walk away the moment you ask me to cross it. Dominic's smile was cold but not unkind. We'll see. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Ellen Marsh? Ellie hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was firm, his palm surprisingly calloused for a man of his position. This was no soft crime lord who directed from afar. He was a man who had worked his way up, who understood the weight of the choices he forced on others. We have an agreement, Mr. Ricci. Dominic, he corrected. If you're to be part of my organization, you should use my name. Part of his organization? The phrase sent a chill down Ellie's spine, but she nodded. Dominic? With that single word, Ellen Marsh, waitress, nursing student, granddaughter, ceased to exist. In her place stood someone new, someone untested, someone whose life was now inextricably bound to one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. Angelo's phone chimed, interrupting the moment. Boss, we've got confirmation from our source in CPD. They're expanding the search perimeter to include this neighborhood. We need to move you. Dominic nodded, already reaching for the shirt that had been laid out nearby. Prepare the secondary location and find something else for Ellen to wear. That uniform is a walking billboard. As Angelo left to make arrangements, Dominic turned back to Ellie. Your first test begins now. Can you help me to my feet without tearing my stitches? Ellie moved to his side, medical training taking precedence over her tumultuous emotions. Put your right arm around my shoulders. Don't strain your left side. With careful movements, she helped him stand. Despite his injuries, he towered over her, his presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. You've made a pragmatic choice, he said quietly, steadying himself with a hand on her shoulder. Remember that in the days ahead. This isn't about morality or loyalty, not yet. It's about survival, yours and mine. Ellie met his gaze, finding in it not the monster she had expected, but a man, complex, dangerous, but ultimately human. I understand survival, she replied. I've been doing it my whole life. A smile touched Dominic's lips, genuine this time. Yes, I believe you have. That's precisely why you're still breathing. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. Inside, Ellie Marsh took her first steps into a world of shadows, guided by the hand of a man who lived and thrived in darkness. 3 days later, Ellie stood before the mirror in her new apartment, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Gone was the waitress uniform, replaced by simple but high-quality clothing that had appeared in her closet that morning. Gone were the dark circles of exhaustion after the first full night's sleep she'd had since the parking lot. Gone, too, was the naive young woman who had counted pennies for rent. The apartment itself was a stark reminder of her new reality, a sleek, modern space in a secure building owned by one of Dominic's legitimate businesses. The refrigerator was stocked, the furniture pristine, the security system cutting edge. A prison disguised as luxury. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Through the peephole she saw Angelo's imposing figure. When she opened the door, he handed her a phone. "Secure line," he explained curtly. "Boss wants to speak with you." Ellie took the device. "Hello?" "Ellen." Dominic's voice was stronger than the last time she'd heard it, 3 days ago when they'd relocated to a sprawling estate on Chicago's outskirts. "Your grandmother is being moved to a private care facility today. I'm sending a car to bring you to her." Relief flooded through Ellie. "Thank you. Is she—" "She's been told you're involved in a sensitive research project that required immediate relocation," Dominic continued. "The police questioned her briefly but found nothing useful. She believes you'll be able to visit regularly under supervision due to the confidential nature of your work." The careful construction of the lie impressed Ellie despite herself. It explained her absence, her new circumstances, and the restrictions on her movements, all while protecting her grandmother from the dangerous truth. "The car will arrive in 30 minutes, Dominic added. "After your visit, you'll be brought to my residence. Your medical training begins tomorrow." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Angelo reclaimed the phone, his expression making it clear he was her handler, not her ally. "Be ready," he instructed, then left without another word. Exactly 30 minutes later, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the building's private entrance. The driver, a sharp-eyed woman who introduced herself only as Tessa, gestured for Ellie to get in. "Your grandmother's personal effects have been moved to the facility," Tessa informed her, as they pulled away from the curb. "Her medications have been reviewed by our medical team and adjusted where needed. She'll have 24-hour care." "Our medical team," Ellie repeated. "How many doctors does Dominic have on his payroll?" Tessa's lips curved in a humorless smile. "Enough. Hospitals, clinics, research facilities. The Ricci family has interests in healthcare across the Midwest." This was news to Ellie. In her mind, crime families dealt in traditional vices: gambling, drugs, protection rackets. The idea that Dominic's influence extended into legitimate healthcare was disturbing on a level she hadn't anticipated. The private care facility turned out to be a converted mansion on several acres of manicured grounds, far from the city's noise and pollution. As they approached, Ellie noted the discreet but thorough security, cameras disguised as architectural features, guards posing as groundskeepers. "Remember," Tessa said as they parked, "your grandmother knows nothing of the truth. Keep it that way." Inside, Ellie was led to a sunny room where her grandmother sat in a comfortable chair by the window, a book open on her lap. Agnes Marsh had always been small, but she seemed to have diminished further in the days since Ellie had seen her last. Still, her eyes brightened when Ellie entered. "There's my girl," Agnes said, extending frail arms for a hug. "What a surprise this all has been, this fancy place, these nice doctors. All because of your special project?" Ellie embraced her grandmother, throat tight with emotion. "That's right, Gran. It's a really important opportunity. I couldn't pass it up." "And they're paying for all this?" Agnes gestured around the well-appointed room. "Must be some important research." "It is," Ellie confirmed, settling into the chair beside her grandmother. "How are you feeling?" "They told me they've adjusted your medications." Agnes waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, you know doctors, always fussing, but I do feel better than I have in months." She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "They say I might even be strong enough for that knee replacement next year." Ellie blinked back tears. Her grandmother had been on a waiting list for the surgery for over 2 years, unable to afford it otherwise. Now, with a word from Dominic Ricci, it was suddenly possible. They talked for nearly an hour, Ellie carefully navigating questions about her new job, her new apartment. She described a medical research project focused on emergency care, with long hours but excellent benefits. Her grandmother listened attentively, pride shining in her faded blue eyes. "You always were meant for better things," Agnes said finally, patting Ellie's hand. "I just wish your parents had lived to see you succeed." Ellie swallowed hard. The car accident that had claimed her parents' lives when she was 7 had been the result of her father's drinking, a detail her grandmother had always softened in the telling. "They would be proud of you," Agnes continued. "Taking care of people. That's what matters in the end." As Ellie prepared to leave, Agnes pressed a small object into her hand, a tarnished silver locket that had been her mother's. "I want you to have this now," she insisted, "to remind you of where you came from, no matter where you go." The weight of the locket felt like a stone in Ellie's palm, a tangible connection to a past that was slipping further away with each passing hour. Back in the car, Ellie remained silent, the locket clutched in her hand as the city scenery gave way to the affluent northern suburbs. Tessa made no attempt at conversation, for which Ellie was grateful. She needed time to reconcile the life she had just pretended to have with the reality she had chosen. The Ricci estate sprawled across several acres, a masterpiece of old-world architecture and modern security. As they approached the wrought iron gates, Ellie could see men positioned strategically throughout the grounds, their watchful presence a reminder that this was not merely a home, but a fortress. Tessa led her through a side entrance into a wing of the mansion that had clearly been designed for business rather than living. Here, the opulence of the main house gave way to a more clinical atmosphere, polished hardwood replaced by tile, crystal chandeliers by recessed lighting. "The medical suite," Tessa explained, gesturing to a set of double doors. "Boss is waiting for you." Inside, Ellie found a facility that would have made many hospitals envious. State-of-the-art equipment filled the room, monitoring systems, surgical tools, even what appeared to be a portable X-ray machine. At the center of it all, seated on the edge of an examination table with his shirt unbuttoned, was Dominic Ricci. "Ellen," he greeted her, his tone neutral but not unwelcoming. "How was your visit?" "My grandmother is well cared for," Ellie replied, setting down her bag. "Thank you for that." Dominic nodded once, accepting her gratitude as his due. "Dr. Moretti will be overseeing your training," he said, gesturing to a distinguished-looking man arranging supplies nearby, the same doctor who had treated him the night of the shooting. "You'll work directly under him until he deems you ready for independent responsibilities." Dr. Moretti approached, extending his hand. "Ms. Marsh, I've reviewed your academic records. Impressive, given your circumstances." Ellie shook his hand, surprised by the formal acknowledgement. "Thank you, Doctor." "We'll begin with a practical assessment," Moretti continued, all business now. "The boss requires his dressings changed and his wounds examined. Show me your technique." Without waiting for her response, he handed Ellie a pair of latex gloves and stepped back, clearly expecting her to proceed immediately. Dominic watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes as she pulled on the gloves and approached him. His torso was a map of violence, the fresh bandages from the recent shooting, overlaying older scars that spoke of a lifetime of conflict. Despite the clinical setting, Ellie was acutely aware of his physical presence, the latent power contained in his frame. "May I?" she asked, hands hovering near the bandage on his side. A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his face at her formality. "Proceed." With careful movements, Ellie removed the bandage, revealing the angry red line of the bullet wound beneath. The doctor had done excellent work. The stitches were precise, the wound already showing signs of proper healing. She cleaned the area with antiseptic, applied a fresh dressing, then moved to the shoulder wound, repeating the process. Throughout the procedure, Dominic remained perfectly still, his breathing steady, his gaze fixed on her face as she worked. Only the occasional tightening around his eyes betrayed any discomfort. "Good technique," Dr. Moretti commented when she had finished. "Clean, efficient, your hands are steady." "I've had practice," Ellie said simply. "My grandmother's medications require careful handling." Dominic buttoned his shirt, his movements measured, to avoid straining his wounds. What did you tell her about your new situation? Exactly what your people told me to say, Ellie replied. That I'm working on a confidential medical research project with excellent benefits and security requirements. And she believed this? Ellie met his gaze directly. She wants to believe I've found a legitimate opportunity, that her sacrifices for me are finally paying off. She paused, then added quietly, I hate lying to her. It's not entirely a lie, Dominic observed. You are working on a medical project with excellent benefits. The nature of that project is simply specialized. Before Ellie could respond, the door to the medical suite opened and a boy of about 12 entered. He had Dominic's dark eyes and strong features, though his expression held a gentleness that his father's lacked. Dad, Angelo said you were... The boy stopped short. When he noticed Ellie, curiosity replacing his initial purpose. Oh, hello. Dominic's demeanor underwent a subtle but profound shift. The hard edges softened, the calculating gaze warmed. Michael, this is Ellen Marsh. She'll be working with Dr. Moretti. He turned to Ellie. My son, Michael. Ellie had known abstractly that Dominic Ricci had a family. It was mentioned occasionally in news reports. The crime lord's wife had died of cancer years earlier, leaving him with a young son. But seeing the boy in person, witnessing the genuine affection between father and son, added a dimension to Dominic that Ellie had not been prepared for. Nice to meet you, Michael, she said, offering a smile. Michael approached, studying her with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Are you a doctor, too? Nursing student, Ellie corrected. Still learning. Cool. Dad says nurses do all the real work anyway. Michael grinned, revealing a glimpse of the charming man he might become. Are you staying for dinner? Mrs. Rossi made lasagna. Before Ellie could formulate a response to this unexpected invitation, Dominic intervened. Ellen has her own apartment in the city, Michael. She's here for work, not social calls. Something like disappointment flashed across the boy's face. Oh, okay. He turned back to his father. I finished that history paper. Can you read it before dinner? Of course, Dominic replied, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. Go set up in my study. I'll be there in a moment. After Michael left, an awkward silence fell over the medical suite. Ellie busied herself with disposing of the used bandages, acutely aware of having glimpsed a side of Dominic Ricci that few outside his inner circle ever saw. My son is not to be involved in business matters, Dominic said finally, his tone making it clear this was not merely a statement, but a rule etched in stone. He attends a private academy in the city. His friends, his teachers, his future, all carefully separated from my professional activities. You want a different life for him, Ellie observed. I want him to have choices I never had, Dominic corrected. Whether he eventually joins the family business will be his decision when he's of age. The casual way he referred to his criminal empire as the family business struck Ellie anew. In Dominic's world, the line between legitimate and illegitimate, between right and wrong, was not merely blurred, it was redrawn according to his own moral calculus. Your training begins at 7 tomorrow morning, Dominic continued, already moving toward the door. Dr. Moretti will provide a schedule and reading materials tonight. I expect your full commitment, Ellen. You'll have it, she assured him. Not out of loyalty to him or his organization, but because knowledge was power, and in her new reality, Ellie needed all the power she could get. As Dominic left to join his son, Dr. Moretti approached with a stack of medical texts and a USB drive. Everything you need to begin, he explained. The drive contains case studies specific to our unique patient population, gunshot wounds, knife injuries, trauma that couldn't be treated in hospitals without raising questions. Ellie understood without being told. One more thing, Moretti added, lowering his voice. The boss has taken a personal interest in your training. That's unusual. He sees something in you, Ms. Marsh. What does that mean for me? Ellie asked, unsettled by the implication. The doctor's expression was carefully neutral. It means your success or failure here will be noticed. I suggest you make sure it's the former. As Tessa drove her back to the city apartment, Ellie stared out at the gathering dusk, the weight of her new reality pressing down upon her. In the span of days, she had gone from anonymous waitress to a member of Dominic Ricci's inner circle, her life now measured in terms of her usefulness to his organization. The silver locket felt heavy in her pocket, a reminder of all she had lost, and all she still stood to lose if she failed to navigate the dangerous waters ahead. In her old life, failure meant an eviction notice, a missed tuition payment, an empty refrigerator. Now, it could mean something far more permanent. Yet, alongside the fear, ran a current of something else, determination perhaps, or the first stirrings of a strange, unexpected power. For the first time in her life, Ellen Marsh was no longer invisible. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to Ellie's new existence. Mornings were spent in intensive study under Dr. Moretti's exacting tutelage. Anatomy, pharmacology, emergency medicine, all accelerated beyond the pace of any conventional program. Afternoons brought practical training in the medical suite, where she learned to treat everything from knife wounds to bullet extractions on training mannequins. So sophisticated, they simulated bleeding and shock responses. 3 times a week she was permitted supervised visits with her grandmother, whose health was improving steadily under the care of Dominic's medical team. Agnes delighted in her granddaughter's stories of the research project, proud of Ellie's apparent success, blissfully unaware of the true nature of her new position. On rare occasions, Dominic himself would observe Ellie's training, his dark eyes missing nothing as she demonstrated suturing techniques or rattled off medication dosages under Moretti's rapid-fire questioning. His wounds had healed well, though he still favored his left side slightly when he thought no one was watching. It was during one such session, nearly a month into her training, that everything changed. Ellie was practicing emergency intubation on a mannequin when the doors to the medical suite burst open. Angelo entered, supporting a young man who was bleeding profusely from a wound in his abdomen. Behind them came Dominic, his expression thunderous. "Moretti," Angelo called, helping the injured man onto an examination table. "Kid's been hit." "Doctor." Moretti moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away the young man's blood-soaked shirt to reveal a deep stab wound in the lower abdomen. "What happened?" he demanded, already reaching for surgical tools. "Calabrese ambush," Dominic replied, his voice cold with controlled fury. "They went after my son's school. Michael is safe, but Marcus here intercepted one of their men in the parking lot." Ellie froze. They had attacked a school, a place filled with children, to get at Dominic through his son. "Ellen!" Moretti's sharp voice cut through her shock. "Assist me, now!" Training took over as Ellie pulled on gloves and moved to the doctor's side. The wounded man, Marcus, couldn't have been more than 25, his face pale with blood loss, his breathing rapid and shallow. "BP dropping," Ellie reported, checking the monitors Moretti had attached. "Pulse 130 and thready." "He's bleeding internally," Moretti confirmed grimly. "Prep for surgery. We can't move him to a hospital in this condition." For the next 2 hours, Ellie assisted Moretti in a desperate fight to save Marcus's life. The knife had nicked the splenic artery, causing massive internal bleeding that required delicate repair. Throughout the procedure, Dominic remained in the room, his presence a palpable force as he watched the efforts to save his man. When Moretti finally stepped back, sweat beading his brow, Marcus was stabilized, critical but alive. "He'll need monitoring around the clock," the doctor announced. "The next 24 hours are crucial." Dominic nodded once, then turned to Ellie, who was disposing of blood-soaked gauze. "You did well." "I just assisted," she replied, too drained by the intensity of the experience to filter her words. "And they attacked a school. Children could have been hurt." Something dangerous flickered in Dominic's eyes. "Yes, they could have, which is why the Calabrese family will no longer be a concern by morning." The clinical way he announced what was clearly planned to be a brutal retaliation sent a chill through Ellie. This was the reality of the world she had entered. A world where violence was answered with greater violence, where vengeance was not merely an impulse, but a business necessity. "You disapprove," Dominic observed, studying her face. "I disapprove of violence that endangers innocent people," Ellie clarified. "On either side." To her surprise, he nodded. As do I, Ellen, which is why certain rules of engagement have existed for generations in our world. The Calabrese family broke those rules today. There are consequences for such decisions. Before she could respond, Moretti called her back to Marcus's side to adjust his IV medication. By the time she looked up again, Dominic had gone, presumably to orchestrate the consequences he had mentioned. Ellie remained in the medical suite through the night, monitoring Marcus's vital signs, changing his dressings, administering medications under Moretti's supervision. By dawn, the young man's condition had stabilized enough that Moretti felt comfortable leaving, instructing Ellie to call immediately if anything changed. Left alone with her sleeping patient, Ellie sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. This was the first time she had been directly involved in treating a victim of the violence that sustained Dominic's empire. The first time, but surely not the last. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, someone was placing a cup of coffee on the table beside her. Ellie startled awake to find Dominic standing over her, his expression unreadable. "You stayed all night," he observed, taking a seat in the chair opposite hers. His suit was immaculate, no sign of whatever business he had conducted overnight visible in his appearance. "Dr. Moretti said Marcus needed monitoring," Ellie replied, reaching gratefully for the coffee. "How's your son?" Something like surprise flickered across Dominic's face at the question. "Shaken, but resilient. He's with his aunt for the day." Ellie nodded, sipping the coffee, strong and black, exactly what she needed after the night's events. "And the Calabrese family? Are they no longer a concern?" Dominic's smile was cold, but not without humor. "You've been learning our euphemisms." "I've been learning a lot of things." "Yes, you have." He leaned forward slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Moretti tells me you're progressing faster than expected. Your technical skills are excellent, but more importantly, you remain calm under pressure. That's a rare quality. Coming from anyone else, this would have been simple praise. From Dominic Ricci, Ellie suspected it was an evaluation of her value to his organization. "What happens now?" she asked, gesturing toward Marcus, who still slept under the influence of powerful painkillers. "Now? You continue your training. Marcus recovers. Business resumes without Calabrese interference." Dominic sipped his own coffee, his demeanor so casual he might have been discussing the weather, rather than what had almost certainly been a brutal elimination of rivals. "And when does it stop?" The question slipped out before Ellie could consider its wisdom. "The cycle of violence, the retribution, when does it end?" Instead of the anger she expected, Dominic regarded her with something almost like respect. "An insightful question from someone so new to our world," he set his cup aside. "It ends when someone achieves enough power and influence that challenges become unwise. I've spent 20 years building toward that goal. And how many more will die before you reach it?" "Fewer than you might think," Dominic replied. "True power isn't measured in body counts, Ellen. It's measured in the battles you don't have to fight because no one dares to challenge you." There was a certain brutal logic to his philosophy that Ellie couldn't entirely dismiss, despite her moral objections. "You saved a life last night," Dominic continued, changing the subject. "How does that feel compared to your previous work?" Ellie considered the question honestly. "Different, more immediate. In nursing school, everything is theoretical, controlled." "Last night was real," Dominic supplied. "Life and death in your hands. The difference between academic medicine and what we practice here." "What we practice here isn't medicine," Ellie countered. "Not exactly." "No," he agreed. "It's survival, and you've proven you have an aptitude for it." He stood, straightening his already impeccable suit. "Take the rest of the day off after Moretti returns. You've earned it." As he turned to leave, Ellie called after him. "Dominic?" He paused, looking back at her with raised eyebrows. "Thank you for keeping my grandmother safe yesterday." A flicker of genuine warmth crossed his face. "Family is everything, Ellen. I protect what matters to those who matter to me." After he'd gone, Ellie turned his words over in her mind. Those who matter to me. Was that what she had become to Dominic Ricci? Someone who mattered? The implications of such a designation were both comforting and terrifying. On the bed, Marcus stirred, his eyelids fluttering as he began to wake. Ellie pushed her troubling thoughts aside and moved to her patient's side. Whatever her moral qualms about Dominic's world, this young man needed her help. For now, that would have to be enough. 2 months passed, and winter's grip on Chicago gradually loosened. In that time, Ellie's training accelerated beyond anything a conventional nursing program would have offered. Under Moretti's guidance, she learned to perform procedures typically reserved for physicians, setting broken bones, administering local anesthetics, even assisting in minor surgeries. More importantly, she began to understand the complex structure of Dominic's organization. The medical suite treated not only injuries resulting from violence, but also provided health care to dozens of families connected to the Ricci Empire: wives, children, aging parents. Many of these people had no access to conventional medical care due to immigration status or financial limitations. In serving them, Ellie found purpose beyond her initial bargain with Dominic. Her relationship with the crime lord himself evolved in ways she hadn't anticipated. What began as wary respect gradually shifted toward something more complex. Dominic's interest in her training remained consistent, his standards exacting but fair. He never asked her to compromise her ethical boundaries, though he occasionally tested them with hypothetical scenarios that forced her to confront the gray areas of her own morality. On a mild spring evening, Ellie was summoned to the main house rather than the medical suite. Tessa, who had become something of a reluctant mentor in navigating the organization's hierarchy, led her to Dominic's private study, a space Ellie had never entered before. "The boss wants to discuss your progress," Tessa explained, pausing outside the heavy oak door. "Just remember, he values honesty over flattery. Always." Inside, Ellie found Dominic seated behind a massive desk, reviewing documents with the focused intensity he brought to all tasks. He glanced up at her entrance, gesturing for her to take a seat in one of the leather chairs opposite him. "Ellen," he greeted her, setting aside his work. "How are you finding your accommodations? Any complaints?" The question caught her off guard. In their previous interactions, Dominic had focused exclusively on her training or his medical needs. Personal comfort had never been a topic of discussion. "They're fine," she replied cautiously. "More than adequate." "More than adequate is not what I strive for in any aspect of my organization," Dominic said, leaning back in his chair. "If improvements are needed, you should say so." Ellie considered this invitation. The truth was, her apartment, luxurious though it was, had begun to feel like a gilded cage. "I would appreciate more freedom of movement," she said finally. "Being escorted everywhere is restrictive." Dominic nodded, unsurprised by her response. "Your public profile has diminished significantly in recent weeks. The police investigation has cooled without new leads. Limited independence might be possible now." Hope fluttered in Ellie's chest. "Really?" "With conditions," Dominic qualified. "You'd remain within approved areas of the city. Regular check-ins would be required, and you'd carry this at all times." He slid a sleek smartphone across the desk. "It's secure, untraceable, and equipped with emergency protocols, should you need assistance." Ellie picked up the device, recognizing it for what it was, both a tether and a lifeline. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Dominic replied with a hint of amusement. "This is a test, Ellen, a chance to demonstrate that my trust in you is warranted." "I understand." "Do you?" His dark eyes held hers. "Since you arrived in my organization, you've exceeded expectations in every measurable way. Moretti reports that your skills now surpass those of most third-year residents. You've treated dozens of my people with competence and discretion. Yet I sense you still consider yourself separate from us, a temporary visitor in our world." Ellie swallowed hard, uncertain how to respond to this uncomfortably accurate assessment. "The truth is," Dominic continued, "you made a choice that night in the parking lot. Whether you've accepted it yet or not, you're part of my family now. The privileges that come with that position, like increased freedom, require acknowledgement of that reality. Family. There was that word again, with all its complex implications in Dominic's world. Not just blood relations, but a network of loyalty, obligation, and protection extending to all who served his interests. "I've never denied the choice I made," Ellie said carefully. "But you're right, I haven't fully embraced it either." And now, Ellie considered the question seriously. Over the past months, she had seen both the darkness and the unexpected light within Dominic's organization. The violence and intimidation, yes, but also the protection offered to vulnerable communities, the health care provided to families who would otherwise go without, the education funded for children of his employees. "I'm trying," she answered honestly. "It's not simple." To her surprise, Dominic smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his austere features. "No, it's not. It never is." He gestured to the phone. "That's your key to a wider cage, Ellen. Use it wisely." Ellie slipped the device into her pocket, understanding the conversation was over. As she rose to leave, Dominic spoke again. "One more thing. My son has asked about you." Ellie paused, surprised. "Michael? Why?" "He was impressed by your calm during the Marcus situation. He's expressed interest in medicine himself recently." Dominic's expression revealed mixed feelings about this development. "He's asked if you might speak with him about your experiences in nursing school." The request seemed innocent enough on the surface, but Ellie understood the delicate position it placed her in. Dominic had made it clear that his son was to be kept separate from the organization's more unsavory aspects. "I'd be happy to talk with him," she said, "about legitimate medical training only." Dominic nodded, approval evident in his gaze. "Tomorrow afternoon, then. Tessa will arrange it." As Ellie left the study, she felt the weight of the phone in her pocket, a symbol of Dominic's growing trust, but also a reminder of her deepening entanglement in his world. The wider cage he offered still had bars, however invisible they might be. Outside, spring had transformed the estate grounds, with carefully manicured gardens now bursting with colorful blooms. As Tessa drove her back to the city apartment, Ellie gazed out at the passing scenery, contemplating what it meant to truly belong to Dominic Ricci's family. The line between captivity and choice had never felt so blurred. The following afternoon, Ellie met with Michael Ricci in the estate's sunroom, a bright space overlooking the gardens, where the boy often did his homework. At 13, Michael was at that awkward age between childhood and adolescence, too serious for toys, too young for the responsibilities his last name would eventually demand. "Thanks for coming, Ms. Marsh," he greeted her formally, obviously coached on proper manners. "Dad says you're really good at what you do?" "Call me Ellie," she replied, taking a seat across from him at the glass-top table. "And your father is generous in his assessment." "I'm still learning." Michael nodded, his dark eyes, so like Dominic's, studying her with undisguised curiosity. "Is it true you helped save Marcus's life?" "Dr. Moretti saved him," Ellie corrected. "I just assisted." "That's not what Marcus says." The boy's face lit up with admiration. "He says you were cool under pressure, that your hands never shook, even with all the blood." Ellie shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to navigate this conversation without crossing Dominic's boundaries regarding his son's exposure to business. "Medical emergencies require focus," she said carefully. "Training helps with that." Michael leaned forward eagerly. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. I'm thinking about becoming a doctor someday. Dad says I can study whatever I want, and lately I've been interested in medicine." "That's a wonderful ambition," Ellie said, genuinely pleased. "Any particular specialty?" "Emergency medicine, maybe, or trauma surgery." His expression turned thoughtful. "Dad says doctors are respected in any world, that they have power that doesn't come from fear." The insight revealed a level of awareness about his father's business that surprised Ellie. Clearly, Michael understood more than Dominic perhaps realized, or was willing to admit. "Your father is right about that," she agreed. "Healing is a different kind of power, one that builds rather than controls." Michael nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Plus, it would be useful to the family, right? Having a doctor in-house?" And there it was. The boy's innocent attempt to reconcile his personal interests with what he perceived as his familial duty. Ellie chose her next words with extreme care. Michael, medicine is a calling that requires complete dedication. If you pursue it, it should be because you genuinely want to help people, all people, not because of any family obligation. The boy's expression fell slightly. But family comes first. That's what Dad always says. There are many ways to honor family while following your own path, Ellie countered gently. Your father wants you to have choices he didn't have. That's a gift, Michael. Don't squander it by trying to be someone you're not. For a moment, Michael looked startled, as if no one had ever spoken to him quite so directly before. Then, slowly, he nodded. I guess I still have time to figure it out. You have all the time in the world, Ellie assured him. And if you're really interested in medicine, I'd be happy to show you some basics sometime. First aid, CPR, things that are useful no matter what career you choose. The boy's face lit up again. Really? That would be awesome. Their conversation shifted to Michael's schoolwork, his friends, his hobbies, normal subjects that any 13-year-old might discuss. Ellie found herself genuinely enjoying his company, impressed by his intelligence and the flashes of empathy that seemed so at odds with the world his father had built. What she didn't realize was that Dominic himself was observing their interaction from the doorway, his expression thoughtful, as he watched the easy rapport developing between his son and the woman who had once been a waitress, counting pennies for rent. Later that evening, as Tessa drove Ellie back to her apartment, the silence between them was broken by an unexpected comment from the usually taciturn driver. The boss doesn't let many people near his son, Tessa observed, eyes fixed on the road. You're being given access few in the organization receive. Ellie glanced at her, uncertain how to interpret this statement. Michael asked to speak with me about medicine. It seemed harmless enough. Nothing involving the boss's son is harmless, Tessa countered. Michael is Dominic's entire world, his future, his legacy. She paused at a red light, then added pointedly, his vulnerability. The implication was clear. Access to Michael represented a level of trust that came with heightened expectations and dangers. I would never do anything to harm that boy, Ellie said firmly. Tessa nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good, because while the boss might forgive many things, betrayal involving his son isn't one of them. The warning hung in the air for the remainder of the drive, a reminder of the complex web of loyalty and consequence that defined Dominic Ricci's world. Back in her apartment, Ellie stood by the window overlooking the city lights, turning the secure phone over in her hands. With her new partial freedom came the ability to contact her grandmother directly, to visit certain approved locations without an escort, to begin reclaiming small pieces of normal life. Yet, as she contemplated these privileges, she realized they represented not a return to her old existence, but a deeper integration into her new one. Each concession from Dominic, each sign of trust, bound her more tightly to his organization, to him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a confusing mix of resignation and something dangerously close to belonging. Ellie placed the phone on her nightstand and prepared for bed, wondering when exactly the cage had become comfortable enough that she had stopped testing its bars. The answer came in the dead of night, in the form of an emergency call that changed everything.